Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Hello, sisters and brothers, ladies and gentlemen, theys and them. Welcome to the Live from the Heartland show. Wherever you're listening from or viewing from, we're glad you're joining us. You can always reach us at livefromtheheartlandshow@gmail.com. And today my co-host is Euan Hague. Hello there, Euan.
Hello, Michael. Good to be here again.
We have three guests today. We're going to talk with Zayn Dohrn about his new book, Dangerous, Dirty, Violent, and Young, A Fugitive Family in the Revolutionary Underground. In our second segment, we'll be joined by the group Silver Rose, Barbie Silverman and Stephen Rosen. And final roundup will be with Cousin Adam James and his sports report. So we're going to take a real short musical break, and we'll be back with Live from the Heartland for the week of May 29th in the year 2026.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us.
Okay, all you citizens of the world, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of May 29th. And I'm still Michael James, joined here by Euan Hague. And our next guest is someone I've known since he was a kid. I've known his mom, his dad, and his brothers. I think I was the one who signed his mother up in Students for Democratic Society way back. The one and only Zayn Ayers Dohrn, who is a professor at Northwestern and has been doing podcasts and books, and now has a new book out getting a lot of attention called Dangerous, Dirty, Violent, and Young, A Fugitive Family in the Revolutionary Underground. So good morning to you, Zayd.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
How about telling us a little bit about your new book?
Yeah, well, the book is kind of a memoir about my own life growing up in the underground. You know, my parents, Bill Ayers and Bernadine Dohrn, were, of course, leaders of the Weathermen, the Weather Underground. And so by the time I was born in the late 70s, they had been on the run from the FBI for about 7 years. And so the book is a memoir of my own growing up underground as a fugitive, kind of learning what that meant, and also goes back and tells the story of how my parents were radicalized and the story of the Weather Underground and the Black Liberation Army and the kind of revolutionary undergrounds of those days.
Tell us a little bit more about your parents and what you would like to share about them.
Yeah, well, my parents are pretty unusual, pretty extraordinary people, both of them. And I think, you know, my dad has told his story before. He's written a memoir himself, Fugitive Days. But in a way, you know, my mom has never told her part of the story. And she was a very prominent figure in the kind of radical movements of that time. And I think an important historical figure. So part of my motivation in writing this book was to kind of tell my mom's story while I could still talk to her and kind of try to understand it. The very brief story about her is she went from being a pretty typical, you know, white suburban girl, straight A student, kind of head of the newspaper in high school kind of person to being FBI's 10 most wanted fugitive and what J. Edgar Hoover called the most dangerous woman in America. So part of the book is trying to unpack how does that happen? How does what makes a revolutionary? How does somebody become that? You know, and I mean, there's a lot of ways that happens, of course, but in my mom's case, it really happened because she joined the civil rights movement as a kind of idealistic young law student. She marched with Dr. King in his rent strike in Chicago, and then Dr. King was killed, and that radicalized her. She joined SDS. She made an alliance with Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers as part of his Rainbow Coalition of interracial activist groups. And then Fred was murdered by the Chicago police. And so these are a series of events that kind of led my mom down the path to becoming more and more radical, more and more anti-government, and eventually declaring war on the United States.
How about your dad?
Yeah, my dad, he had a parallel path. He grew up the son of a CEO here in Chicago, well, in the suburbs. And his dad was kind of the head of Commonwealth Edison, right? So he was a pretty privileged kid. He went off to the University of Michigan, got involved in anti-war activism, burned his draft card, was arrested at a sit-in at the Ann Arbor Selective Service Office. And, he too joined SDS, became increasingly radicalized. And then when my mom split SDS to form the Weathermen, he followed her and eventually followed her into the underground. So yeah, they have these kind of parallel stories that eventually merge shortly before my birth.
So Zayd, tell us a little bit about why you decided to write this book. You've had a lot of other things going on. You did a podcast that addressed a lot of these issues. You've got a few books out. Why did you want to write this, and why did you end up doing it?
Yeah, well, so my podcast, Mother Country Radicals, was the first time that I kind of tried to tackle my family story. And the honest truth is I made that during the pandemic because a lot of my other projects were shut down. I'm mostly a playwright and a professor, but during the pandemic, everything stopped. And I started to think, what can I do at home? And also I started to think my parents are getting older. They were in their 80s. And they are in their 80s. And I started to think, if I'm ever going to ask some of the questions that I wanted to ask about my family history, I'd better do it now. So I started interviewing them, not sure what it would turn into. That became this podcast, Mother Country Radicals. And then once the podcast came out, I sort of thought I had told the whole story, or at least as much of the story as I was interested in telling. And then a couple things happened. One thing is I had filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the FBI when I started working on the podcast. Of course, they stonewalled it. They wrote back and said, you want files on Bernadine Dohrn? We have something like 2,800 boxes of files on this woman. So it's going to take 15 years to process it all, And anyway, we fought them. We hired a lawyer. But by the time the podcast came out, we were still in that fight. After the podcast came out, I finally got a thumb drive from the FBI with 7,000 pages of newly declassified documents about my mom. And they were fascinating, and they shed some new light into my family history. So that got me thinking there was more to this story. And then a lot of people who had heard the podcast reached out to me, kind of like, you asked to talk to us before, we weren't sure, but now we're ready. Or like there were some secrets that we couldn't tell you, but now some of the people have passed away, so we're more comfortable sharing. And so the story started to grow. And I just felt like there was a real interesting story to tell, not only about my family, but about the history of radical and revolutionary struggle in this country. So that's really what the book is.
What stands out about your interviews with your folks? What, like some of the first things when you first started asking them questions? What do you remember about that early experience?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you two things. I'll tell you the general sense I had of it, and then I'll tell you one particular story that kind of blew my mind and led me to writing the book. The general thing is that my parents, even though their lives had been steeped in a certain kind of secrecy, right? They were underground for 10 years. They have a code in the underground about not talking, about not naming names, about keeping some stories until everybody involved has passed on. So in a certain way, it was tricky to tell this family story because it's a secret story and in a sense, a criminal investigation of my own past and my own family story. That being said, they were very transparent with me. We had some ground rules about if there's something they can't tell me, they couldn't lie to me, but they could say that's something we're not going to talk about. I think they only used that privilege maybe 2 times in the 3 years that I interviewed them. And both times were because I'd asked about friends of theirs and what actions they had been involved in, what criminal activity they had done. So there's certain things they wouldn't say. Most things they were very open about. There were a couple things. I'll tell you just one funny thing that I stumbled upon. This is an example of what it's like to look into my family's past. I have this memory when I was like 3 or 4 years old. And like all memories of that age, it's kind of part memory and part family story that I've heard over the years. But it was this camping trip we took to West Virginia. First time I ever put up a tent, first time I ever cooked on an outdoor stove, those kinds of things. And I remember it as a fond memory for me. But as I started to do some research into this book, I was building a sort of a roadmap to the underground. I was using this old Rand McNally road atlas we had to sort of trace where we'd gone and where we'd been. And I realized that that campsite where we had my very first camping trip was a half mile from the federal prison where they were keeping Assata Shakur, the head of the Black Liberation Army. And I pressed my dad on that. I said, this can't be a coincidence. And it slowly came out that indeed we had been there, at the request of the Black Liberation Army to case the federal prison with the hopes of breaking Assata out of prison. So it's just one of those funny things where my own family history and my own childhood memories collided with this piece of radical history that I had never known before.
Zayd, what was your most emotional experience in doing the interviews with your parents? And was there ever any real resistance or anger in the process? I guess partly I want to know, too, what their reaction to you writing the book has been.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there was resistance or anger. You know, I'm now a father myself. I'm old enough to have a pretty, a forgiving attitude or just an understanding attitude about the complexity of human beings and how my childhood was difficult in some ways. You know, my mom went to prison when I was a kid. I remember feeling afraid of, the FBI chasing us when I was little and those kinds of things. But the truth is my parents were very good parents. They were very loving to me. And I feel mostly just gratitude that despite our incredibly strange circumstances, that they were able to protect me as much as they did. There were emotional moments, my mom getting older and losing her memory at this point. So those kinds of conversations, as anybody who has an elderly relative knows, there's a kind of nostalgia and a sadness that comes with trying to kind of unpack memories and questions you've had for a long time with somebody who's, trying to be in that conversation with you, but is slowly losing some of those stories. So those were emotional times. I don't think there was anger. And to answer your question, Mike, I think in terms of what they think about the book, my dad's always been a very open, transparent person. He loves having the story out there. I don't think he thinks that I got everything right. He wrote his own memoir. He has his own ideas, but I think he thinks that mine is authentic to what I was trying to explore, and he's happy about it. My mom is a much more private person, but I think ultimately she came around and feels, glad that I was able to tell my version of the story.
Did you ever have any experiences with the FBI around your parents' involvement? I had a roommate named Davey Wellman at Berkeley, and his dad had been head of the CP in Michigan. And he told me stories as a kid how about the FBI would intercept them coming home from school and challenge them, ask them questions. Anything like that happen for you?
Well, when when I was really little, we were underground. So the FBI was just this abstract presence for me. I mean, of course, we never encountered them because the whole point was to stay away from them. I mean, when I was 3 years old, my parents were teaching me how to spot an undercover cop or an undercover FBI agent and what that might look like and what that might mean for us. So I knew about it as an abstract idea, but I never had encounters with the FBI, of course, while we were underground. Once we turned ourselves in when I was 4 or 5 years old, there were some things, certainly our phones were tapped. Certainly we had agents surveilling us when we were living in Harlem. And eventually when my mom was arrested for, refusing to testify against some of her former friends in the Black Liberation Army, I remember that day. I remember when the undercover agents showed up at our house and took her away. But yeah, it's funny because as big a presence as the FBI was in our family life, it was very abstract because, of course, they had no idea where we were.
I remember I was going to court at 26th in California here in Chicago from a bust I had. And I remember the FBI approached me asking me if I knew where your mom was. Mm-hmm, and I remember telling them, I said, I don't know where she is, but if I did, I wouldn't tell you. And they said, thank you, Mr. James. Yeah,
that's a good response. I'll tell you one amazing thing I found in those declassified FBI files that I finally got hold of. The FBI went down to interview my grandparents, Barney and Dorothy Dohrn, in Sun City, Florida, where they had retired when we were underground. And the FBI files on my mom have transcripts of the interviews between the agents and my grandparents. They're trying to get them to tell where my mom might be. And two things happened that were kind of crazy. One is my grandma, being a kind of an all-American housewife, invited the agents in and baked them chocolate chip cookies, and she was trying to be a good hostess, The other thing is, for a while they chatted, catching up on like what it's like to have kids these days and that kind of thing. And then when the FBI agents realized that my grandparents weren't going to cooperate, they sort of stopped playing Mr. Nice Guy, and they would show up at my grandparents' home in the middle of the night, pound on the door, wake my grandpa up, and they would say, we have your daughter, she's dead, you have to come and identify her. And my grandfather would, put on his bathrobe and slippers and follow them in a car to the local morgue. They would open up the refrigerator and show him a young woman's dead body. Of course, it wasn't my mom, but this was a way that they were trying to sort of break my grandfather and kind of convince him to help cooperate in catching her, just to avoid having her hurt. So anyway, these details in the FBI files about the lengths to which the FBI went to try to catch my family, and the kind of intimate nature of those conversations and relationships.
Let me follow up on reaction again. I'd be curious to know what your brother's reaction has been to your book, both Malik and Chesa. And then maybe a little bit, you've had a lot of book readings around the country, and my reading of some of the reports on some of those are there people, old people, young people, supporters, people who think your parents ruined the movement, et cetera, et cetera. So what's your brother's reaction, and what have been some of your experiences out on the highway, so to speak, telling the story?
Yeah. I mean, my brothers, our family is pretty open about these things, and my brothers have been very supportive. They both gave interviews to me for the writing of the book. We talked extensively about our own memories of our childhoods, what that was like. Of course, Chesa, my adopted brother, Chesa Boudin, is now a public figure. He was the district attorney of San Francisco and now runs a legal clinic in Berkeley. It was brave of him, I would say, to kind of open up to me about these intimate details of our lives and his childhood and what it was like for him to be abandoned by his parents and to be taken in by my family. But he's read the book. He was one of my first readers, and he's been very supportive. My brother Malik is a much more private person. I don't know if he's read the book, but he was very, very nice to, give me a long interview about our shared memories of growing up. And we're still quite close. So he's not involved in the book in that way. I don't know if he's read it, but I feel very supported by the whole family. And to answer your second question, it's been wild to be touring around with the book, because I do think it's kind of coming out at a moment when people are very interested in these questions of like, what happened to the movement then, and what does it mean for the movement now? So we are having old folks, boomers and movement folks show up at the readings, and kind of some people, of course, want to litigate the questions of like, did splitting SDS hurt the movement? Was the Weather Underground a positive force or a negative force? Those kinds of questions. I think the young people are much less interested in the factional disputes of that time and much more interested in the broader question of what should we be doing now? What can that history teach us about what makes an effective movement and what makes an ineffective movement? What I try to do in the book through telling these stories is give us some kind of signposts, both for how that revolutionary moment can inspire people who want to resist right now, and also some of the kind of Achilles heels of the movement around things like ideological purity tests and factionalism that you can see happening in the left again today, and I think are really dangerous to any movement that wants to build a broad coalition.
And probably violence, too, plays a role in there.
Absolutely, violence. There's big debates about, how far is too far and all that kind of stuff.
I was going to, I know Euan has a few questions, but I was going to ask what your advice is to younger organizers, younger radicals, progressives in these times. I have a granddaughter who was doing a paper on the Rainbow Coalition recently, and she was asking me a lot of questions. And I basically talked about how social change is a long, slow process, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, a few back, more forward. And a lot of people get disillusioned by how slow it is and how long it takes, and sometimes want to move to a more militant stance. And I'm just wondering what you would share with people who ask those kind of questions.
Yeah. I mean, my first instinct is to say, I don't want to give young people too much advice. I feel like even at my age, in my 40s, I'm too old to be telling the movement what to do next. I mean, I do have a lot of faith. I have two kids of my own. One is 18, one is 21. And I have a lot of faith in this generation who has come of age in this very dangerous, disturbing moment in American history to kind of help us, fight through it and find a better way forward. Of course, if I thought I had nothing to offer, or that the movement of the 60s and 70s had nothing to offer, I wouldn't have written the book. I hope that young folks can read this history and glean from it, the way we always can with history, the sacrifices that have come before, the courage that their ancestors showed, the imagination that, people like Dr. King and Fred Hampton and the Panthers and even members of the Weather Underground were able to show about what it looks like when we militantly resist oppression. I think those are all good lessons. But yeah, I also just want them to tell us how to do better next time.
Euan.
Yeah, well, I was wondering, I don't think it's a coincidence that Chicago is central to a lot of this. Obviously, you mentioned Martin Luther King being here in the 1960s, and obviously one of the first major weather operations, the Days of Rage, was here in Chicago. The SDS split was here in Chicago. And so I'm just sort of wondering, what's your sense of the Chicago in all of this? And of course, now you've made your career and life and career here in the city. I mean, I think we maybe don't recognize, we often look to New York or Los Angeles, but I think Chicago is central to all this. So I'm just wondering your take on the Chicago at all.
100%. I think it's a Chicago story, and I think it's a Chicago story because Chicago has been the heart of activist radical resistance in America going back over 100 years. 200 years. I think, going back all the way to the Haymarket Square, quote unquote riot and on, right? But you're right. In the book, I kept noticing how my mother's story and the story of SDS and the story of the Weather Underground always comes back to Chicago. It's, it starts with my mom's work with Dr. King and the rent strike. It goes through SDS, through the partnership with Fred Hampton and the Black Panthers, through Fred's murder in Chicago, through the split of SDS, the founding of Weathermen, the Days of Rage, all those things. It is a Chicago story. And I think you're right that, of course, New York and Los Angeles play a role both in this story and in the wider movement. But so much of the kind of radical activism in this country has been birthed in the Midwest and specifically here in this city. And I think folks in Chicago will see a lot of landmarks in this book about how important the city has been to that struggle.
How about talking a little bit about your deepest criticism of your parents and your fondest memory?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my deepest criticism has to do, and I think they would cop to some of this, so I don't think it'll come as a surprise to them. But I think that, like a lot of people who are convinced that what they're doing is right, they could fall into a sort of a self-righteousness and a kind of like insistence on everybody following their radical line or leaving the movement. And what that led to in the case of the Weathermen and then the Weather Underground is a sort of a narrowing of their part of the movement to the point where, they were able to be split. I mean, of course, the FBI was very happy to help along any factional splits that were happening at the time in SDS and in the Black Panthers. And I think at my parents' worst moments, they helped those factional splits along by kind of insisting that only they had the right answers. And so I think that's a lesson to the left. My fondest memories, I writing this book, you just can't help but see both how extraordinary their courage was and their revolutionary imaginations, and also how we were, it was a loving family for all the craziness of my upbringing. I have great memories of being on the road with them, even though we were like running from the FBI. We had family road trips, we had picnics, we camped out for a while at a California commune where they had some friends. And that was all just, a really nostalgic and important part of my childhood. We have a couple minutes left. What's next on the horizon after this book? Obviously, it's been it's getting a lot of coverage. You're writing plays and teaching, I guess. What's next on the horizon for you? Yeah, so I had a musical I wrote with the Rage Against the Machine guitarist Tom Morello that opened at the Goodman in Chicago in October. We're planning to take that to New York next year. So I'm working on kind of revisions to that and casting and all the rest that kind of builds that into that New York production. I'm working on a couple TV projects that are one based on the podcast and the book, one separate from that. And of course, yes, I'm teaching. I have some great writing students at Northwestern, trying to help them build their voices and their careers. And sending my daughter off to college. Those are my big plans.
And since you're at Northwestern, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. What's been the response of faculty members and students to Northwestern kind of caving on DEI and Palestine demonstrations and the president leaving?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, it's been an insanely complicated and difficult time across academia at Northwestern and at every university I know of. I think there's a lot of dismay about the places where the university has caved. Certainly, the faculty has been up in arms about the deal that was made with the Trump administration. And I think most of us feel that it was a unacceptable deal and that we never should have gone into those negotiations as if it was a good faith conversation. But, you have to say that it's been widespread across academia. I don't think Northwestern's worse than many other places. So, it's a difficult time. And I think we're all trying to figure out, as everybody outside of academia is trying to figure out, how do we resist? What are the best places to have our voices heard and so on?
Zayn Ayers Dohrn, I want to thank you for joining us. It's good to see you. I saw you the other day, and you've done great work, and keep it up, brother.
Thank you, man. Appreciate
you guys having me. You're going to continue to share. We want to thank everybody who's tuned in here on the left end of your dial or wherever you're listening or viewing to Live from the Heartland. We're going to take another musical break, and we're going to be back with our next guest, the folk duo Barb Silverman and Steve Rosen. The group is called Silver Rose, and they have a date coming up that they'll tell you all about. We'll be right back. Stay tuned here on the left end of your dial. Hey, you citizens of the world. Welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of May 27th, the year 2026. I'm still Michael James here with Euan Hague. And my next guests are someone, or at least one of them I go way back with to the Heartland Cafe. We used to have a lot of performances there, and I think she was one of the performers, the one and only Barb Silverman, joined by Steve Rosen. And she and he are part of a group called Silver Rose. And it caught my attention, her name, not only that, but also that they were going to be playing an afternoon matinee at the Montrose Saloon on June 7th. And I thought it'd be great to have them on. So hello to you, Barb, and hello to you, Steve.
Hello to you and you.
Can you tell us about that song we heard coming in? Whether you know the name of it or just remember something about it?
Well, I was playing the washboard, and it's a fiddle tune, and hopefully Steve can remember the name of it, because I never can. But we were backed up by a couple of friends, Charlie and Pat, who are great musicians too. But it's an all-time fiddle tune, and Steve's playing high-powered banjo, and I'm playing the washboard.
I got a washboard somewhere around here. I'll have to practice so I can come hang out with you guys.
And I don't have a high-powered banjo, but what would you? How would you describe your music?
What mix of old-time folk, country, novelty, vaudeville, swing?
Yeah. Americana.
How did you two meet each other and come to form this group together?
I think we met at a party 40 or so years ago.
I think we came out of Primordial Ooze together.
That's the way we'll build a show. Primordial, however you say it, ooze.
So I met Steve. He was playing the banjo with another guy named AC Cargill. Is that right? And I don't know. And I was in the Lake Town Buskers, which was a jug band at the time. And somehow we realized our talents were well matched. So we started doing some duo things together. Long time ago, and we have periodically through the years just kept doing our little duo and named it Silver Rose. But we're also in another band now together called Buds and Shoots.
What's it called?
Buds, B-U-D-S, and Shoots, S-H-O-O-T-S. And
And how many people in that group? Just the two of you, or got more? Well,
sometimes it's 4, 5, or 6.
How about sharing with our listeners and our viewers how a little bit of your own personal histories and how you got involved in music and what you've done? Start with Barb.
Okay, my oldest brother had Joan Baez and Bob Dylan records, and that's what turned me on to, that vent. I took some classical piano, and that's my understanding of music's really based very much on piano. Chords, triads, intervals, and so on. I played a little in college and post-college up in the Indiana Dunes. There was a coffee house called Saturday's Child, and I performed there some. But I started coming to Chicago to study modern dance and to play music. And then I moved to Chicago. And are you guys sitting down? Are you all sitting down out there in the radio world? I moved up there 50 years ago.
You're only 52 or something like that.
I was right. I was 2 years old when I became famous. And anyway, I started playing in a country band and then a jug band, the Lake Town Buskers. We had a lot of recognition through the years. Played on Prairie Home Companion a number of times, played at festivals all around the Midwest. That band kind of dissolved. I created a band called the Teflons, 3 women and 3 men, and we did a lot of shows around the region. And then I formed Buds and Shoots. But Steve and I, throughout all this, stayed as a duo and periodically do things.
Well, Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, what you did growing up, how you got into music, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I'm going to tell you that I am originally from New Jersey, but only if you say what exit.
What exit?
I'm from New Jersey.
What exit?
I've been here in the Chicago area since 2nd grade. I saw my first bluegrass band when I was probably in my teens, and bought my first banjo and have been playing bluegrass, old-time music, all kinds of other stuff ever since there. A couple of my main bands were the Volo Bogtrotters. We were together for 30-some years, and we're actually playing at the Fox Valley Folk Festival coming up Labor Day. Perhaps our last performance, I don't know. But played with them for years and years, made a bunch of albums, and played festivals all over the country. And also played with various bluegrass people, and have played a lot of barn dances with the Chicago Barn Dance Company, and have traveled all over the country, actually the world a little bit, to play for contra dances with various bands.
The folk scene is very vibrant in Chicago. I was actually recently at back in February at the Old Town for Sons of the Never Wrong, who are, well-known local performers. And I'm just sort of wondering, how is the Old Town? You're both involved with the Old Town School of Folk, and it's very important to the city.
Well, first of all, I played a little washboard with them. Were you there that night?
I don't know, maybe their February kind of like celebration gig.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Newest release. I only played on one tune.
The Old Town.
Old Town School's been driving music in the city since the 60s. And I came on board here. I had done concerts with my jug band, opening for bluegrass, big time bluegrass, Ralph Stanley, and some of the big folky guys, Bob Gibson. And then I joined this faculty in about 1998 or something like that. I've been on faculty since then. But Old Town has its hands in so many pies and multiple styles of music. Steve, what would you say?
I would say the Old Town School has its finger in pies of different musical genres, many of them.
Wait, I just said that, Steve.
I only say what she tells me to.
Do either of you go back far enough to remember Fleming Brown?
I know the name. That's before my time, but he was one of the founders.
Yeah, I remember him coming up to Lake Forest College and in my early exposure to some folk music. Who are your favorite influences in both of your lives?
That's hard. There's so many.
I need only one or two, be fine.
Well, Joni Mitchell influenced my songwriting, I'd say, and singing. Jug bands,
Maybe Queskin and the Jug Band or whatever they were called.
Right.
How about you, Steve?
I have been mostly influenced by old string bands. I would rather listen to an old fiddler playing a recording 50, 70, 90, 11 years ago, scratching away at a tune than I would hearing any other kind of overproduced or overthought music. I love the banjo and fiddle tradition. That's what really got me, and a little bit of bluegrass and Western swing. I don't know if it's influenced my music that much, but Western swing has been my love, as well as Irish lately and French Canadian, like all kinds of traditional styles is what
Same. Martin Bogan and Armstrong from the 30s and 40s, a black string band. Big influence. Bob Wills.
Yeah, I was thinking Bob Wills. Well, there's a lot of great music out there to hear. And one of the reasons we had you here was because you're going to put on a little bit of a show with some great tunes. So how about you tell us, Barb, about your big event coming up at the Montrose Saloon?
It's funny. The Montrose Saloon, we, independently of one another, have performed all over the world. I mean, I did a little thing in Finland. Steve's been all over Europe, Czechoslovakia, Italy. But we've never performed at the Montrose Saloon, which is 4 blocks from my house. And the Montrose is this institution. It's a typical but atypical Chicago bar. It's been around for a long time. It's beautiful. Wood, old, it's got a gorgeous courtyard. And I've seen, friends of mine who performed there over the years, and I always thought, I should go to the Montrose, see if they might be interested in us. And sure enough, we're booked there, and I'm excited about it. We're going to be there Sunday, June the 7th, from 2 to 4. There's an outdoor courtyard that has speakers. We'll be on the inside performing, but you can be either place, either watching us or hearing us. And Steve, I don't know, what do you know about the Montrose?
I have never been there. I've probably driven by it. I hope I can find it that day.
Well, the address is 2933 West Montrose, so you can just put that into your
2933
West Montrose, and you're performing under the name Silver Rose, and it's on June 7th, an afternoon matinee. Let's hope. Nice, warm, sunny Sunday afternoon. Fingers crossed.
It'll be good. I go by that place a lot. I used to see it when I'd go to the Korean bathhouse, the Paradise, which got torn down.
Which
was just the greatest, had the best jets of any bathhouse I'd ever been to. Anyhow, It's great that you guys are going to be playing June 7th, 2 to 4, Montrose Saloon. We want to thank you both for coming on live from the Heartland, and we'll look forward to seeing you in person real soon. Everybody else, stay tuned here on the left end of your dial or however you're getting live from the Heartland, whether it's CAN TV, whether it's Lumpen Radio, WLUW, bunch of other places, enjoy. And we'll be right back with more Live from the Heartland. What's the tune we're going to hear on the way out?
Are You Tired of Me, My Darling by the Carter Family.
Ooh, I like it. Okay, everybody, we'll be right back.
Are you tired of me, my darling? Answer only with your eyes.
Citizens of the world, welcome back to the final segment of Live from the Heartland for the week of May 29th. And as usual, once a month, we bring on my cousin Adam James out there in Los Angeles area with the Adam James Sports Report. Hello, Adam.
Hello, everybody. Great to be here. Always a
pleasure. What do you got for us, brother? Cousin?
Well, first of all, congratulations to the Northwestern Wildcats women's lacrosse team. They just won the national championship. Phenomenal. It's actually their 9th national championship. And when I was playing football there, one of my good friends, his significant other was a member of that lacrosse team, and tremendous accomplishment by that program. So,
and the World Cup is going on soon. What do you got on that?
That's a really big sports story that's getting ready to occur. That's just a short while away. The World Cup is going to be coming up from June 11th and running all the way through late July. And one of the big stories about this World Cup is just the low energy, the low ticket sales, how that's impacting this enormous event. And then you combine that with some of the controversial things that are happening with the Iran program.
Yeah, I think Iran, the national team Iran, are scheduled to play in Los Angeles and Seattle, but the United States is not allowing their personnel into the country for more than the game. So they're actually going to be staying and training in Mexico and literally commuting, flying in for games in Chicago, in California and Washington. So just treating them, just not treating them like a host should treat a guest in a major athletic tournament.
Yes, indeed. It's been a really interesting undertaking. And one other thing about the Iran situation that I will say is in a positive for that team is that they are chosen Tijuana as their location. So it's actually a lot closer to where they'll be playing 2 of their 3 games. They're playing in Los Angeles for 2 of them, and then the third will be in Seattle. So in a way, it's a lot better. And plus, if you've been to Tijuana, which they're Muslim, so it's not going to be good. Anyway,
I think the other interesting thing you were saying, ticket prices, this dynamic pricing where basically demand was setting the price, and now because people could not necessarily afford it or did not know how much they'd be paying, the prices begin to drop. But I saw in New York City, Mayor Mandami has managed to make a lottery for $50 tickets. So he's managed to get a deal for the residents of the city of New York that can put their names forward and try and get a cheap ticket.
Yes. And on a positive note, this is an amazing sport. And it's so great when you see people come together and celebrate, and they have that nationalistic pride. So it is going to be a lot of fun. I encourage people who are, fans of the sport to go out to watch parties if you can't actually get tickets to a game, and to, go to a bar and have a cold one with somebody who's cheering for a different team. That's actually part of the World Cup experience.
Right. Speaking of national nations in sport, the 4th of July is coming up, and we have that time-honored American spectacle of a UFC fight on the White House lawn.
Yes, this has been something that people in the MMA world are conflicted on. I work in the MMA world. I have a program and I teach people how to be a coach or trainer in the sport with the National College of Exercise Professionals. And I love the game. I love this sport, and I love the athletes that do it. But the organization UFC has positioned itself in a unique way that, in many ways, draws in more fans, but also pushes away many people. And that is its political positioning. Now, it's not the only sport that does that. The NBA is very aligned with, the African American community, the Black community, obviously, and they do a lot during Martin Luther King Day, which some people take as political positioning, and some people feel that it drives them away. So with the UFC, they've made this conscious choice to embrace a particular political party, and this has gotten into a position where they're going to have this event on the White House lawn. Many people find it to be completely inappropriate in regards to the blending of politics and a particular business and how much sway or impact that receives as a result. So, the other thing about the sport of MMA that's going on in regards to politics is, the UFC was recently purchased. The person that bought it is actually a Democrat, and a very important and powerful one. And that's Ari Emanuel, whose brother was the mayor of Chicago. Was he a good mayor, Michael?
I'm not a fan of him. I had a nice picture of me and him hugging each other one time when he was at the Heartland, but no, he wasn't my favorite.
So just to connect everything,
yes.
I once saw Emmanuel when he was walking along Irving Avenue, as I was walking along Irving Avenue at 6 o'clock in the morning to go watch a soccer game in the Globe pub, which used to be the only place in Chicago before everything became on domestic television or your streaming service. You had to go to a bar at 6 o'clock in the morning to watch a European soccer game. And I bumped into Emmanuel outside the bar one day. So watching games at bars, definitely a thing to do in the World Cup and other times.
Yes, and so what I was going to share with everybody, if you didn't already know this, but TKO, which owns UFC now, has been pushing for a bill with Congress, and so the House of Representatives already passed it. It's called the Ali Revival Act, and they're using that name because it's reminiscent of the original Ali Act, which came in 2000 and was a significant and important thing for the sport of boxing. But this Revival Act is using the Ali name and is attempting to create a system that will give more power to the leagues or organizations. The idea is that you're going to run the sport of boxing more like UFC. And the people in the boxing world are very much against it. The fighters and the boxing organizations, UFC's for it. Surprisingly, one group that I noticed was for it is the California Athletic Commission. And when I did my research on why they were supporting it, it's because of the safety measures. They do have some strong safety measures in this bill. However, conversely, a lot of the small enterprises, they're saying that this new bill will price them out. It has requirements that are impossible for a small venue or a small league to be able to match. And so what they feel it's doing is it's putting the UFC and organizations like that into a position of a monopoly.
Another thing that I wanted to bring up, I saw on TV someone from the NAACP talking about a boycott of SEC, the Southern Athletic Conference, whatever it's called, and they, a lot of big teams, South Carolina, Louisiana, Georgia, et cetera, and calling for black athletes, like high school kids coming up or people already playing, to boycott the SEC and those teams over the gerrymandering and redistricting of kicking basically black congressional people out. What do you got on that, Adam?
Yes, it's actually a really significant thing. The NAACP has decided to make this statement and encourage African-American Black families to keep that in mind, because these are young men and women that are making a choice, but their families are also engaged in making that choice. And yes, the specific states that were singled out were Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Texas. And these are the ones that have been using their political positioning to restrict and change those voting laws. And so, it's a fair thing for the NAACP to request or require or encourage. However, this announcement did come after the cycle, after the transfer portal cycle, after the recruiting cycle. So whether that was intentional to soften the blow, to allow people to, think about it before it's an acted upon decision, or whether they just got the word out late after that cycle was completed. But it won't have any real effect for another year or 2 or 5. But it's a fair thing for, families to start thinking about, not just Black families, but families that support democracy and are against fascism, to think about, where you're going to go and bring your talent, because that's what college athletes are. They're a talent and they're a workforce. So that's another thing that, of course, is a big topic in the sports world is the NIL, name, image, and likeness, and how that's affecting college sports. There's a lot of effort to curtail or control or rein in how that's happening. I'm a big believer in freedom. I'm a big believer that the athletes have rights and they should be able to transfer just as any college student transfers each year. The one thing about them, these college athletes, is they bring a lot with them. They impact finances. So the one thing, there is another bill that's out there right now, which they're trying to push forward in regards to college sports. And one of the congressional representatives made an interesting comment. He said, it's not about the NIL, it's about stability. And it's about creating more balance and stability for the institutions, because it's not just one sport. It's not just football and basketball as well, but you've got all these other sports that rely on the economic impact that their football team generally provides. And when that has instability, an unknown factor year to year, you never know, all the other sports, women's lacrosse, for example, will be affected. So we also want to take that into consideration when the greater society is helping, come up with a plan and how to handle these kind of things.
I think we have about a minute left. And, when I was talking with you on a family Zoom not too long ago, we started talking about probiotics and fermented vegetables, et cetera, like sauerkraut. Yeah. And so I went out and I like sauerkraut. I went out and bought some sauerkraut. It's not my favorite brand. I'm going to look for Frank's. Might make some myself. But what do you got on that, Adam? Your little dietary
yes,
today.
Absolutely. Well, in brief, I'm a big believer in natural, healthy eating. Eat small meals throughout the day. Drink lots of water. Avoid processed foods, especially sugar. And then when it comes to supplementation, I'm a big believer in supplementing HOPE. But HOPE is an acronym. It stands for high fiber, omega-3s, probiotics, and digestive enzymes. So for some people, they want to take they need to take a fiber supplement. Others, it might be an oil supplement, like a fish oil, to get those omega-3s in you. Probiotics are something that not everybody's eating. So if you're not eating healthy fermented foods, then you might want to consider that. By the way, if you go and you buy a sauerkraut, if you check to see if it's a pasteurized product, you will find that most of, if not all of the healthy bacteria has been destroyed or killed off, so to speak. So the best probiotic foods are the ones you make in your own kitchen. And it doesn't take much. It's a little salt, a little cabbage. That's how you do it with kimchi as well. Just add some more hot peppers in there.
Well, we'll be trying it out and we'll give you a report. We want to thank you for coming on, Adam. We want to thank all of our guests today. We started off with Zayd Dohrn. We had Barbara Silverman and Steve Rosen of the group Silver Rose. And we had Adam James giving us his monthly sports report. I want to thank Euan Hague for joining me as the co-host today. I want to thank our engineer, Hal James, our producers, Katie Hogan, Lynn Orman, Tom Clark. And we will be back next week and we'll have some really good guests. You want to tell everyone who our guests are going to be next week, Euan?
Yeah, we have Nabila Washington, who's a local nonprofit leader here in Chicago, works a lot with young journalists and young writers, particularly from the west side of Chicago. So we're looking forward to having Nabila. And we have we have a psychologist, Joel, joining us from California, talking to us about anxiety, stress, and how to cope with it.
That'll be a unique show, and we hope you all join us. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We encourage you to keep doing good in the world, because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that Hal does, Euan does, Adam does, everybody else we know does. Keep doing good in the world. All power to the people. Over and out till next week.
She can. Over the mountain.
Thank you for watching the Live from the Heartland show.
You got a dream
New episodes
awaiting.
air every Friday
I
beginning
can
at 9
see
a.m.
it
Central
in your
Time.
eye. It may not
Episodes air
come
each following Thursday on
easy,
Can
but
TV,
you know
9
you've
p.m.
got a friend.
Sweet Home Chicago.
I'll
on
be
Channel
by your
21,
side the
or
entire
streaming
ride.
everywhere
Just
else
let me
at
hear you say
cantv.org.
amen. Are you doing?
Audio episodes go live on WLUW
Are you
Saturday
doing
9
the
a.m.
best you
on the
can?
left end of your dial at 88.7 FM or streaming
Tell
everywhere
me, are you
worldwide
doing?
at WLUW.org.
Are you doing the best you
They're
can?
available on Apple and Spotify podcasts by looking up Live from the Heartland on either platform, and are also broadcast on Lumpen Radio each Friday at 9 a.m. on 105.5 FM and streaming at lumpenradio.com. I'm Michael James, and I'm glad to have been your host. Until next time, remember, do good in the world because the world needs all the good that you do, that I do, that we do together. All power to the people. Over and out.
Come to limb. Are you doing the best you can? Tell me, are you doing? Are you doing the best you can?